I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the answer and not really much time thinking about the question. We're taught to kind of like, the question's easy, just what's creative is the answer. But actually, if you put more effort into what the question is, so what are you really trying to solve for the ultimate end user? And actually, if you can spend more time thinking about that than saying, hey, I've got a great idea how we can use this technology.
Rule number 1. You are not the customer.
Because of my background, they'll say, I've got this great idea for a SaaS business. Can I show it to you and you can tell me what you think? Yeah, you can do, but it's kind of irrelevant what I think because I'm not your customer. I could blow smoke up your ass if you want me to, but actually you'd be much better off talking to an actual customer than me. For B2B SaaS, unless it makes people money, saves people money, or keeps them compliant, anything else is a nice to have and you're never going to scale that.
Hello. And welcome to the Unicorn Marketing Show. Now today I've got a real treat for you. I'm going to talk to you about how you could be the next SaaS leader and how you can build your own software business and make millions. Now the reason I can do that is because today my guest is the extraordinary David Hart. Now David Hart has been there and he's done it. He's written a book about it called Productized, and he is coming to us today to talk about why marketers make excellent entrepreneurs. I first met David about 25 years ago. We were actually competitors at that time, but we got to know each other and liked each other. We worked together for a year and then we went in different ways. He went off to start an agency, and from that agency he built a business called ScreenCloud, and that business grew to 20 million ARR and is still going. And when David got back from the USA, he and I got back in touch, and I thought that you might like to hear from him. So this is how our conversation went down.
Happy to be here.
Back in the day, like before the millennium, if anyone can remember, or if they were born then, we were in opposing companies in London.
Yeah, we're kind of competitors in a kind of industry that wasn't particularly competitive because there was so much money floating around. And it was the .com boom before its inevitable bust.
The incubator world.
Yeah. So my company was Brains Park, and I don't know who invented the Park or the Spark. Thing, but you were Gorilla Park.
Gorilla Park, yes, indeed, yeah. I've noticed actually these days a lot of people who were my colleagues at Gorilla Park have airbrushed it from their CVs.
Really?
It's like the whole incubator thing was a slightly embarrassing thing to admit, having belonged to, because it was so mad.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about some of the money that was the budgets that we were given to do parties and things like that. And I remember at the time thinking, this is absolutely crazy. I love it, but I will never see anything like this again. And sadly, I never have, because it was so much fun at the time. But really unrealistic as a sort of sustainable way of going about things.
It was, but what I quite enjoyed though was, I think we started 16 or 17 businesses at Gorilla Park, and seeing all of those things go from idea through to like almost viable business. I think, and it was a portfolio game. So I think we were saying earlier, I think we both each had 3 or 4 businesses that went on to do really well.
Yes.
So the business model actually was perfectly good.
Yeah.
We just ran out of money getting there, I think.
Yeah. And, sentiment changed, and we managed to IPO actually we just IPO'd just before sentiment changed. So I think you had lastminute.com, and about 2 weeks later we floated, and I think everyone at the time was going, hang on, lastminute.com is worth how much? And it was kind of the beginning of the end, really. But
blimey. And then we had a very short period where we sort of coexisted in almost an agency.
We kind of had this notional idea, hey, we should come together and create a bit of an agency. I think I had one client that was Pearson, and I was pretty much just working for them and then just billing it through the company. But it was, I think you and I both probably felt the same. It's like we want to kind of do something, and we want to build our own thing. Yeah. I then actually went to work for an agency, so I kind of went went to work for a company called Reading Room, which people might have heard of. They're a Soho-based agency. I met my 2 co-founders there.
Okay, for Cogent.
For Cogent, which was the agency we then started in 2004. It
was a good agency. I mean, I was following it, thinking, shit, why didn't I just hang on to his coattails? But I remember following. You did some really cool work there. But you, at one point, then decided with your co-founders to change the business model.
Yep.
Away from being an agency towards being a product company. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I think we flirted with products from quite an early stage. Actually, I think that the thing that worked well for us to start with was mobile apps, and it was just because we had a team that were building in Flash, and if you remember Flash,
I do
kind of disappeared, and we were like, what do we do with them? Do we make them redundant, or do we kind of do something else with them? So we said, right, learn how to do mobile apps, because that was the thing that was coming along. And they did. And just to, they just launched a kind of, it was a phrasebook app. We called it a language app. It was called Learn Thai, because we had a load of developers. We had an office in Bangkok. And it did really well.
So really strategic. You thought about where's the market opportunity here?
Yeah. Accidentally, it did quite well.
That's fantastic.
And we also, because we'd done quite a lot of work in the agency for CBeebies, we also decided to create some kids apps as well, and they did pretty well. So I remember there was one time at Christmas, it was a Christmas that everybody had been bought iPads. And we came back after Christmas, and suddenly our revenue had gone through the roof. And I kind of like, man, we've made more money from these products than we actually pay ourselves individually as owners of the company. I was like, and it gave me an insight, I think, into the potential for scale, the potential for generating revenue when you're not necessarily in the office doing stuff. So you could sell. It didn't make any difference to us whether we sold one app or a million apps. It didn't make any difference. It made a difference to us in terms of revenue, but in terms of, the cost to us were negligible. So, I think that was the thing that it started the bug, if you like. And initially we kind of thought, well, we'll just build a portfolio of products. And it was kind of this idea of, great, it can level out some of the peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
And it's another revenue stream. And didn't really think much beyond that. And then I think, as time went on, we decided we were kind of done with the agency world, and we really loved product. I think I said, I think we did 15 products in all, and we sold.
Did you really? Wow.
We sold, but a lot of them were rubbish. But we sold 4 of them, which is good, to a private equity company, to some private companies, and then we were kind of thinking, well, maybe this is what we do. We become a product studio, and we have a portfolio of products. And we started talking to investors, and I remember taking this investor out. I met an investor somewhere, I can't remember where. I said, can I take you out to lunch and buy you lunch and pick your brains? And I'm thinking, I'm going to tell him this great idea. And he just went, I said, so we're going to have all these products, and we're looking for funding to invest in all these product ideas. And he was like, no one's going to invest in that. I was like, really? He goes, why would I give you the money to go and decide what you're going to, that just doesn't work. So I was like, oh, and it made us kind of think again. And eventually we said, look, if we're going to do this, I think that probably the way to do it is to focus on one thing and sell our agency and just focus on this one thing, which was ScreenCloud, which was a SaaS business. We ended up.
That's a big decision.
Yeah. And it makes it sound like it happened overnight, and it didn't. I think the big thing that we decided was that we were going to be a product company and not an agency. That was the first thing that we decided. I think once we had that decision made, then that was our kind of North Star, and we were just focusing on that. We're going to be a product company. We don't quite know what that will look like, but that's where we're going to end up. And I think as we had more discussions with people, we realized it will always be a side project if it's a side project.
Yeah.
And one of the products we had was a SaaS tool called Twilert, which is a Twitter monitoring tool. And it got up to about £30,000 in monthly recurring revenue, which is great. But, it just never got beyond that. Yeah. And actually it started to go plateau and go backwards. And it wasn't really until we properly went for it that things moved. And that's what happened with ScreenCloud. And today ScreenCloud's like north of $25 million in annual recurring revenue. It was obviously the best financial decision we ever made. Yeah. It is scary because you're there's a point as well at which you there's no going back. So we were raising money, and we went to see a VC, and they were like, and we decided we were going to sell the agency, but obviously you can't just sell an agency overnight. And we were so he said, this is interesting, ScreenCloud. So what's this Cogent thing? And you're like, don't worry about it. It's, we're selling it. And he's like, interesting. I need you to sign a side letter that says, if you haven't sold it by the time I put my money in, you have to close it down.
Oh,
so
blimey.
Yeah. So it was kind of like, okay, well, this really is the point of no return at that point.
Wow.
But yeah, so those kind of moments were quite scary.
When you made the decision then to switch, did you have recurring revenue, or were you still on in development and kind of early market?
I don't think we were at recurring revenue by the time we made that decision, if I'm honest.
Big leap.
But we were pretty confident that this was a good idea. And I think we'd also got to the point where we said, you know what, we're done anyway. We either close the agency down and go and work in a pub, or we go and do this other thing? Because I think we were just done with the client stuff.
That's really good foundation, I think, for what we're going to talk about today. Now, the reason I asked our team to get in touch with you and bring you back in, you wrote this book, Productized. You talked about the whole story. We have 4 copies of this, which we're going to give away at the end of today's show. And you've very kindly signed them. Thank you very much. I actually have a 5th copy, but I've read it. So whoever gets that one, it's already read. Productization is much on everyone's lips at the moment. I think, the agency or the client agency relationship is changing. That kind of dreaded in-housing thing that, it's a pendulum, isn't it, that swings backwards and forwards. But I think agencies and clients are looking for a different type of relationship. And I think one of the things that excited me about what you've done is we're not talking about physical product. We're not talking about packaged time, because both of those obviously are product. One of the big trends in agency at the moment is to productize service, but that's still time based. Even if it's sold as a product, it's still time based. And after our paths diverged in the early noughties, I got into product company, physical product. And that comes with a whole other load of other headaches like inventory and supply chain and all that other crap. Digital product's totally different, of course. And so today we're going to explore, I think, why we think that, or why you think particularly that marketing people generically, but agency people specifically make really good SaaS founders. Before we do that, let's start with some of the challenges that you faced in the early days of ScreenCloud. So we've got the foundation, you've sold the agency, you're now 100% SaaS business. You've got to go build a market, build an audience. Talk to me about the challenges.
One of the big challenges is obviously is that we had no idea what we were doing. And as an agency founder, I think you do have certain superpowers that give you an advantage over someone who's maybe just come out of business school or something like that. But nevertheless, there were things that we didn't understand about SaaS. I didn't really understand quite how compounding revenue would grow. And I remember when we first started, and we did maybe $400 in the first month and $600 in the second month. And I was like, man, at this rate, it's going to take a century before we get back to the revenues that we were generating in our agency. And it was pretty scary. I didn't realize quite how those things ticked up. So the big challenges for us was not really understanding that much about SaaS. When you're an agency owner, you're selling in much more of an enterprise way. You're going in, you're meeting the client, you're kind of doing discovery. We were selling $20 per screen per month product, with maybe, I think the average value was about $60, $65. Okay. So you couldn't afford to do that. So you had to automate everything. So there was a load of things that we had to learn around that. Your customer acquisition cost has to be really, really low if you're only charging $65 a month. And so, we just had to kind of figure out how we were going to drive customers, how we were going to automate them through. We did it as a free trial. So lots of things that we'd never done before, I guess, more of a kind of mass marketing as opposed to your more account-based marketing that you might do in an agency.
My experience of starting things is there are always those wise old sages who tell you it's a really dumb idea. No one's ever going to buy it. It's not possible. Did you have any of those naysayers that you had to screen out?
The unique thing about us was that we were coming at it completely from a software perspective, whereas the industry as a whole were hardware vendors. Okay. So really they were selling screens and media players. That was their thing, and software was a bit of an afterthought. And we were like, well, hang on a minute. The thing that got us to think about this as a product is that at the time, everyone was buying these Fire TV sticks and Google Chromecasts and making their TV smart. And we were like, well, hang on, we can watch Netflix on our TV at home. Why can't we put stuff on our screens in the office? And that was the kernel of the idea. And so we just said, right, we're just going to build something that works on a Amazon Fire TV stick. And I remember we went to a kind of conference, and lots of people there talking about bevel edges and pixels and stuff like that. And we were like, oh yeah, we're just going to do these things on these weedy little sticks. And they were like, kind of almost like patting us on the head saying, good for you with your little niche idea. Good luck with it. That's never going to work. No, you can't run a professional digital signage network on an Amazon Fire TV stick, because that's a consumer product and you need these $10,000 commercial products. And we were like, but obviously in our naivety, we just thought, well, I think why not? Yeah, let's do it. And actually what it turned out to be amazing because lots of other people were thinking the same thing. And most of our customers in the early days were greenfield. They'd never done digital signage before because it was prohibitively expensive and cumbersome. And they were probably saying the same thing as us, like, hang on a minute, these little things, can't we just do stuff on that? So there were naysayers. And actually, probably if we'd known about the industry a bit more, we might have been put off because we might have thought, oh God, nobody, we look like idiots if we try and build a digital signage network off these consumer bits of hardware. But then, 12 months, 18 months later, everybody was copying us.
But it's a superpower, I think. Sometimes when you go into a market, but sometimes, and we're going to talk about validating ideas a little bit later, but I think sometimes you don't want to over-validate because I was at an event yesterday actually where people were talking about speaking to customers about what they want and then delivering it. And we've had that as a theme on the podcast before, but often customers don't know what they want. And they would know about the prohibitive costs of hardware. And so if you'd gone to a customer and say, hey, can you see yourself using this kind of device? They'd probably have said no. Yeah. But I think that self-belief is really important in the early stages.
At the time, the digital signage industry was a different type of it was servicing a different type of customer. So effectively we kind of helped open up a different market. If you looked at the Gartner reports back then, and it was saying, well, what's the potential size of the market, it was pretty small because they were assuming, I think, that it would just be this group of people that bought these, people like McDonald's who would have vomit-proof screens or something, but most of us don't need those. But it's fine, we can just use a normal TV.
You still had to market and get, or communicate, I should say, and launch yourself in a market with some pretty big players. And presumably you didn't have enormous resources to do it. Talk to me about how you went about getting awareness.
I think there were two key things. One was deliberate and one was accidental. We didn't have enough money, as you say, to do an advertising campaign. We'd raised a little bit of money to start with, we did an angel round to start with, friends and family. So we definitely couldn't afford to do Google ad campaigns or anything like that. So what we did is just invested in content. And we hired a brilliant person called Beth, who just worked for us. She used to work for our agency, actually, and then she went freelance and started working for us part-time. And we just said, can you just write 3 articles? I mean, this is going back, so things have probably changed, but can you write 3 articles a week? But what we wanted to do was not write really about digital signage, but write about the use cases. So they were very long tail. And we were finding that people were finding us... I mentioned earlier about it was a greenfield sort of bunch of customers. So they weren't necessarily looking for digital signage. And digital signage, especially in the UK, wasn't really a thing. Yeah. You said digital signage and people thought it was PDF signatures, that sort of thing. And so what they were looking for were the more of the use cases, like how do I show my tweets, as it was, on a screen using a Fire TV stick? And so we just wrote loads of content like that around... we looked at all these use cases and then all the verticals. So schools were using us, churches in America, big users, offices. So we might do something like, how do I show students' work, paintings on a screen using an Amazon Fire TV stick or something like that, and in schools. And then we just write a whole load of stuff like that. And it was early days, nothing really happened, but we just kept going. And I would credit a lot of our growth was down to content that we did. Really, we did videos as well. We kind of did, again, really lo-fi videos of how to set things up. And so that worked really well for us. So that was the kind of deliberate thing. The accidental thing, which was enormous, was I mentioned earlier that nobody else was doing digital signage on an Amazon TV stick.
Yep.
And in order to use our service, you had to download the app from the App Store, from the Amazon App Store, or the Google one for their Chromecast. And because we were the only ones doing it, and there were loads of people that were searching for this stuff that was kind of wasn't necessarily your traditional digital signage, we were easily found. So we were only people there. So if you went onto Amazon and said digital signage or anything related to digital signage, we were the only ones that were coming up. So we were just getting discovered for free. And people were just downloading it because we were doing a free trial. There was just no barrier to entry. They could just download it, play around with it. They already had the stick probably for some other reason. I think that was massively influential for us in the early days. We hadn't planned it, but it was
great.
But I think it's something that I say to people that I work with now is you need to be discoverable. You need to be where people are looking, and it might not be necessarily the obvious places. It might not be that they're saying, "Hey, I'm going to go onto digital signage." I don't know, like a news site about digital signage, because I hadn't even considered that's what I wanted. I just I had this particular use case.
You had that advantage for a year, maybe?
Yeah.
You said that other people then caught up pretty quickly. So your point of differentiation was technology based. Other people were able to catch up.
Yeah.
How did you handle things then? Like, so a year, maybe a year and a half in, when there's more competition?
Because we'd already established ourselves. We had, content was still really, really important. And there was a direct correlation between traffic and trialists, which again, as I've learned since, especially when you're doing enterprise, that the two might not be as closely matched. But yeah, if we could drive more traffic, we could drive more trials, and people at scale behave in a predictable way. So we could be pretty clear that the more traffic we drove, the more trials we'd have and the more conversions we'd have. We'd also raised money at that point, so we could start doing advertising. Okay. We were working really hard on the product. In fact, we decided about 2 years in to completely rebuild the product, because we realized, I think our investors said, if you want to get to $100 million, you're going to struggle if your average annual contract value is $600 kind of thing. You're going to have to, get tens of thousands of customers on board. So we realized that we needed to start appealing to more enterprise customers. And we also realized that the product that we'd built, which was really just an MVP, we were just trying to solve a problem, actually it didn't really work for enterprises who had more kind of security requirements, more complex workflow and permissions and things like that. So we rebuilt from scratch, which was great. In some ways it was great, in other ways it wasn't, because it then took us another year or so before we launched the new product. So we had a load of customers. We'd spent a load of money rebuilding this thing, and not a single customer had used it. But it meant that we, all the kind of product mistakes or things that we'd learned, we could then put into the new product. So it was quite a bold thing to do, but it turned out to be the right thing to do. So when that was launched, the product was sort of technically had kind of outrun some of the competition at that point. But I also think, we'd built a bit of a brand. We'd got a reputation. We'd got a great portfolio of customers. We had some great case studies. Once you get out of that kind of early bit and you can start shouting about all the great things that you've done, I
always think momentum's really important. And, certainly when I was building this business, nothing like the scale you guys have built, but that momentum sort of ends up feeding itself, I think. And one of the challenges I've had in the market for the last 2 or 3 years, when confidence gets sucked out of a market, everyone's momentum kind of slows down, and that in itself kind of compounds the slowing down. So I'm hoping that 2025 we might see some green shoots again.
Yeah.
Let's think about marketers now, and like why people might productize, and why marketers and agency people in particular might be ideal. What advantages do you think people who work in marketing, but agencies specifically, are well suited to SaaS?
This isn't really marketers so much, but agency owners or anyone who started their own business. You have that entrepreneurial DNA. You've kind of built your business. You've probably built it without any financial help. And I do think sometimes we underestimate how much that puts us in a relatively small club. People who've built their business from nothing on their own. Not everyone does it. And you kind of just take it for granted because everybody else around you has done it. But actually that puts you in a quite a unique position. So I think having that kind of that grit and those battle scars, I think, are really important. You're also probably capital efficient by nature because you've had to be, especially if you haven't raised money. You've had to kind of really make sure that you've used that money wisely. And investors increasingly are appreciating that. It's a double-edged sword as well, because I think it can have a negative impact when you're responsible for a fast growth VC-backed technology company, but nevertheless, it's still a good thing to have. You probably understand a vertical, probably better even than people who work in the vertical, because you might have, I'm working with a company at the moment called Pixelate, and they have a product, they're an agency, but they just work for membership organizations. Okay. So they know everything that every membership organization, probably better than people who work in membership organizations themselves, because they're seeing tens or maybe hundreds of organizations. So you've got that kind of insight that I think gives you a massive advantage, depending on type of agency you are, but you might have a team in a box already. So like us, we were mucking around with ideas in our downtime, which I think is fine in the early stages. You have to kind of move it from just stuff in the downtime to making it more specific, or more, putting more effort into it than just when you haven't got other stuff to do for it to really fly. But early stages, when you're just experimenting and doing MVPs, imagine if you just came out of a bank as a career in a banker, and you're right, I've got this great idea for a SaaS startup. You couldn't just kind of do things in your downtime unless you were personally a coder, or you would probably have to go and hire a team or outsource it or whatever. But you've just got that thing kind of there. So I think, the entrepreneurial grit and just having that knowledge, I think, gives you a massive advantage over others.
We're taught to experiment, right? And you take an idea, you test it, you validate it, and if it works, you scale it. And we talked already a little bit about, like, ScreenCloud was your 15th or 16th product, which implies you did a lot of experimentation before deciding that's the one.
Marketers generally, they're paid to be creative and to come up with ideas and to try and solve gnarly problems. And also, I think, bringing their A game to lots of things at the same time, I think, which again lends itself to that idea of coming up with ideas for products, or trying to identify problems that you could solve in a different way. So for sure, I think if it does put you in a good position, I think, if you. I'm not disparaging of other professions, but I think you are kind of, you're exposed to that kind of thing on a daily basis. Like, we've got this product that we need to sell, and we need to have an innovative way to sell it. So you're constantly being able to think like that. Yeah. And
there's a good history of agencies creating pretty famous products. Yeah. In the book, you name a few.
The ones that people always bring to mind are people like 37 Signals and Basecamp. So they had an agency for a bit. They had this project management tool and decided to productize it, and then thought they'd give it a go. They'd say, well, let's see if we can get $5,000 of monthly recurring revenue by the end of the year. And I think they hit it within 2 or 3 months, and eventually thought, well, let's do this, and stopped doing the agency. MailChimp is another good example. He had Ben Chestnut had an agency that was building kind of ads, small digital ads and things like that, and running email campaigns for their clients. And then he automated it, realized that he could turn it into a product. Yeah. But then, closer to home, I mentioned Pixelate earlier. They were a digital agency, 20 years old. They productized the sort of functionality that they built for membership organizations and SaaSified it. And it's called Ready Membership. And that's its own standalone SaaS product now. Still with a lot of professional services on top of it. Okay. Another company I'm working with called Studio Graphene, which is an agency. They've just launched an IoT food monitoring SaaS service, which is really early stage. So Pixelate are quite a long way down the line. They're doing a significant amount of revenue from Ready Membership. Telson, which is the product that Studio Graphene has spun out, it's when I met them, they were at the idea stage, and now it's revenue generating, but it's still early days. And you seeing still then people, they're building a product and they're focusing on that, but wrapping service around it? Well, in Pixelate's case, it's very much an enterprise sale, and you can't really, they haven't managed to disentangle it yet. With Telson and Studio Graphene, it's a completely different product. So it's standalone. Okay. There aren't really professional services. There's a little bit, but it's not to do with the agency. Thinking about setting up or productizing something you do, or let's just say if you're thinking about starting a SaaS company, what are some of the early steps you'd advise people to take? I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the answer and not really much time thinking about the question. And what I mean by that is, we're taught to kind of like the question's easy. Just what's creative is the answer. But actually, if you put more effort into what the question is, so what are you really trying to solve for the customer, the ultimate end user? What ultimately is their problem? And actually, if you can spend more time thinking about that than saying, hey, I've got a great idea how we can use this technology. By the way, we didn't do any of this. So this is what I've learned post. But if you think about, we used to be quite happy with the way that you took a taxi. Uber came along and completely changed the way we thought about riding taxis. And what they did was effectively said, well, look, I think, what are the steps currently for taking a taxi? You have to go and find the taxi. You have to tell the guy where you're going, get to the other end, make sure you're there, pay the amount of money, work out what the tip is, take the receipt, claim it back, all that kind of stuff. And Uber just said, actually, all you have to do is say where you want to go and then pay the tip. So they've taken out 6 or 7 steps within that. So I think that's where the innovation comes from. It's thinking about really understanding the question and then trying to figure out how can you use technology to remove some of those steps. The other thing for me is which again we never did, is it's really important. There's 2 ways I think that I talk about in my book actually of validating an idea. One is like internal validation, which you can do for free really quickly, and really that's one of the ways around that. I think is really asking yourself the question for B2B SaaS, unless it makes people money, saves people money, or keeps them compliant. Anything else is a nice to have, and you're never going to scale that. So you have to be brutally honest with yourself when you're thinking about the things that you want to produce. Genuinely, is it going to make someone money, save them money, or keep them compliant? If it's, doesn't quite really do any of those things, it's probably a nice to have. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing is, does it keep the CEO awake at night? Is the problem that you're trying to solve or unlock keeping the CEO awake at night? And with ScreenCloud, we didn't realize this, but we thought the problem was that there were blank screens. People had screens, and they were either blank or they were showing Sky News on mute. That's what we thought was the problem. But actually, the reason why we started ScreenCloud is because I wanted to put KPIs. We had an agency. I wanted to put the KPIs on a screen in our office, and we couldn't work out how to do it other than having a Mac Mini gaffer tape to the back of the screen. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I perceived that when we were doing our kind of monthly updates to the team, that they weren't really engaged. And I remember at Reading Room, actually, we used to have a flip chart where we used to write how much money we'd generated that month and how close we were to our targets. And for me, it was a real kind of compelling way to get everybody behind what you were trying to do as a company. Like, hey, look, we're 20,000 quid off hitting our targets this month. What can we do? What can we invoice? What product can we finish? What project can we finish? So I wanted to kind of install some of that because I was worried that people weren't caring and it was having an impact on our revenue. So the thing that was keeping me awake at night as the MD of our agency was we're not hitting our revenue targets and nobody seems to care. So what ScreenCloud did it was unlock, to my mind, unlock some of that opportunity. So it wasn't that I was looking at screens and going, I'm really annoyed that they're blank. That would be a nice to have. But I was looking at those screens and saying, I think they can actually change something within our agency, and and it can make us more money effectively. So it's unlocking a particular problem. So I think that's really, really important. And you've got to be brutally, brutally honest with yourself. If it doesn't do either of those things, it's probably a fantasy. So, and then the second part of product validation is actually talking to customers. It really is about, I recommend a great book called The Mum Test here, which I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a the thing that you can't do is go out and go, hey, I've got an idea for a business and show them a kind of wireframe, because they're just going to tell you, yeah, that's lovely. I like it. Really like it. What you really need to do, and again, working with a few people recently about this. So I was working with one company, they're an agency, like a data company, and they built a product which was a benchmarking tool. Okay. And I was like, but none of their customers were really using it. They're giving it away for free for a year, hoping that then they could turn around and say, hey, do you want to use it? Yeah. And they were like, yeah, no, they're just not really engaged. And I was like, have you asked them the question, do you benchmark your data against your competition? They were like, no. And I was like, why? And really, it was because they didn't want to hear the answer. They don't want to hear no, yeah. And I was like, we've got to come up now with 2 or 3 questions that absolutely terrify you, because otherwise you won't get the information that you need. And also those kind of questions might reveal something that you hadn't really understood before. So it's really, you've got this validation, you've got some of it in your own head that you can just do. Yeah. And then you've got this free resource, which is customers. But weirdly, we don't ask customers. We just hope, fingers crossed that we've kind of figured something out and, they're going to love it. But actually the customers are out there and by and large, they'll happily talk to you for free. Yeah. And if you do it in the right way, you can get some real massive insights.
It is a special skill, though, speaking to customers, isn't it? Because, I think certainly my experience of doing it as, not as a startup, but as, if you like, as an incumbent, and asking about service standards and service improvement is what they tell you they want isn't always what they actually want.
Yeah.
So I think you have to focus in on their problems rather than offering them a solution and say, would you buy this? I
was doing something with a customer recently, and their branding agency had come in and said, right, we've got this great idea, and they'd come up with this kind of concept. And I was like, have we talked to customers about this concept? I couldn't see how that would relate to customers particularly, but so I said, right, let's go and have these conversations. And I was pushing, the kind of conversations I was having was, what was it like before you used this product?
Okay.
And they were like, wow, it took me so much time to collate data. And I was like, well, wow, okay, what are the impact of that? Well, I didn't have any time to be really strategic. I was like, okay, and I kept pushing, and eventually he said, I missed out on a promotion. And I was like, ooh, yeah, okay, well, tell me about that. So, and then he starts saying, well, yeah, they didn't think I was strategic. They thought I was a kind of data monkey, but I am strategic. I just didn't have time. And so you kind of think, okay, that's a massive insight there. So what can we do? Maybe the messaging is around how we make you a hero amongst your bosses, and how we make it really easy for you to produce, really insightful research documentation or something like that. I wouldn't have got there if I'd said, hey, I've got this idea for a product that allows you to do, I don't know, nice research papers. He wouldn't have told me anything that was useful, but it's just, pushing without leading. I think that's the challenge. Don't tell them, what do you think of this idea? Because they're going to tell you, they're going to say it's nice, which is, or just because they want to get off the call, and also people don't like to hurt other people's feelings.
Yeah.
So
this reminds me, actually, fun enough, sort of back where we started, but these are some of the conversations back in the incubator days that I used to have with startup founders. And one of them was like being really clear on who the customer is, like who's actually paying. And your mentioning of Uber makes me think of that. So I was involved with a small group of people in about 2013, 2014, and we were trying to solve the wrong problem. So we were looking at taxis, we were looking at minicabs, and thinking the problem with them is they're always, half of their time they spend being empty. So can we create a piece of technology that allows them to get paid in both directions? So Uber solved that problem, but they solved a bigger problem because the customer isn't the minicab company. The customer is the person taking the car. And so their customer was more powerful than ours, and they were solving a bigger problem. So I think part of the challenge when you're thinking about doing something new is being really clear on who the customer is. Because if you're, like in our case, we were looking at drivers and minicab companies thinking that they're the ones that have the power. Actually, it's customers that have the power. They pay the bills.
We were exactly the same. We built one product. It was called Get Dash. It took us a year. We had this idea, or rather Luke, our CTO, had this idea, and he just went off and built it. And we didn't talk to a single customer.
Really?
And then when he did the ta-da, it was like, it was different to what we thought as co-founders, what it was going to be. And then we'd all fallen out of love with it because it had taken so long and it never saw the light of day, really. We spent over a year and God knows how many thousands of pounds. But again, if we'd involved customers and actually had conversations early on, it's weird. I don't know why. But as agency owners, we probably, and marketing departments as well, we probably advocate customer research. That's part of the thing that we do. But when it comes to our own thing, we're like, nah, we're not going to do that. We know the answer.
We know the answer, Rule number 1, you are not the customer, right?
Quite often people say to me, because of my background, they'll say, I've got this great idea for a SaaS business. Can I show it to you and you can tell me what you think? And I kind of say, you can do, but it's kind of irrelevant what I think because I'm not your customer. Like I could blow smoke up your ass if you want me to, but actually you'd be much better off talking to an actual customer than me. There's only a limited amount of value that I can add.
Huge value.
Well, I can add value in some areas, but I could add value in terms of, how you might go about launching the product, but I can't really necessarily tell you whether the product is valid or has legs. You have to talk to an actual customer.
And so we're talking mainly here about, I mentioned earlier digital products, but specifically we're talking about SaaS. And I noticed recently Salesforce has announced they're going to change, or they're thinking of changing their billing model, I think, away from a per seat to a usage model, a bit like Azure or AWS. Do you think that puts in doubt the future sustainability of the whole SaaS model? Or do you think that, I mean, was SaaS a moment in time, or do you think that there's still legs for that model?
Again, I think it all comes down to the customer ultimately. So, I mean, do you remember when we used to have mobile phones and you used to have to pay per text and per minute?
Yeah, I do actually.
Which is kind of annoying, right?
It was really annoying.
Aren't we happier now that we have, and the reason is because you have a kind of, I know how much it's going to cost me each month. And so for some customers, that's really important. Yeah. And for some customers, the usage element is actually scary, because if it might be something they've got no concept of. Within ScreenCloud, one of the things that we did was a tool that allowed you to live stream. And for us, the cost of that was directly related to, how many people were watching it and how long the stream was and all that kind of stuff. And so we were like struggling with, well, how are we going to do this? And we thought about a kind of usage model, but we thought actually for customers, it's really complicated. They just want to say, it's X dollars per screen per month, because then they can budget for it. If they're kind of saying, well, it's this, but if suddenly 1 month, your CEO does a live chat and loads of people log in, then that's going to cost. And they were like, well, we've got no way of knowing what this is going to cost us in that case. And so I think there's room for both, really. I mean, it makes sense, I think, especially where it's very direct, the value you're getting as a customer. So for example, we used to use a tool in our billing which would do automated dunning, credit card checks. So this is when we're a product-led growth, self-serve type product. And the way they billed was the amount of money that we save you from people churning and not being able to, we'll charge you a percentage of that. So for me, that was easy. That was a no-brainer. It's like, okay, so I'm going to lose less money and I'm going to give you some of that. That doesn't kill my budget. If something sort of takes off, like actually weirdly AWS, like we got stung a few times with AWS, but obviously you accept that. But it's just a lot of customers aren't necessarily technical, don't necessarily understand the usage basis. So it might not work for them. But I think with all these things, it's going to evolve. And the other model that I've sort of seen is 37 Signals have brought out this thing called Once. Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen that. What's that?
They've repackaged, I think it was Campfire, which is a product they had, a SaaS product they had a while ago, and said, look, instead of subscribing to it, you just buy it for $250. And it's it's like, they say it's a bit like Slack. So instead of paying $20 a month per person or whatever it is for Slack, which if you're a huge organization, that can ramp up. You can just buy this bit of software once and you host it, you install it, you run it, but it does all the functionality that Slack
Sugar
does.
CRM did that as well, They've got a...
Yeah. And so you go, okay, well, that's an interesting model as well. I mean, it makes sense. It only makes sense if you're a company that feels confident enough to kind of host your own SaaS product. And also it has to make sense commercially for the people building the software. And I think for them, obviously they've got a big reach so they can sell lots of these things. And I think, a bit like the old days when Adobe updated Photoshop, you'd go and buy another CD. I think it's a bit like that. Like they might say, well, if you want to upgrade to the next version, you have to pay again. But, again, it might work well for some products and not well for others. So I think we probably will see emerging models like that, but I don't think it kills.
It's not going to kill it, is it?
I was going to say.
I mean, I think in Salesforce's case, maybe, their per seat license, certainly the enterprise license, unless you're really using all of the functionality, is pretty chunky these days. And maybe this is a reaction to allow to try and grow the audience, because they are de facto the gorilla in the marketplace. So how are they going to grow now? Yeah. They have to change something, and price being one of the 4 Ps is an obvious place to look at. Can we change the way people perceive price? And
the other thing to think as well is that, the outcomes are shared in as much as if you have low use, even if you're paying per seat, if you've got low usage, if no one's actually using your product, they're going to churn anyway. So it's in your interest as a SaaS company to ensure that people are using the product all the time or as much as possible. So again, I think it just comes down to what is most valuable to the customer and makes most sense to them, and doesn't kind of put them in a situation where they suddenly end up with a massive bill they weren't expecting.
Right. Let's talk about your book. What made you want to write a book? That's a labour of love.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, at ScreenCloud, we did me and my co-founder started writing. We wanted to create a new market category and thought we should write a book, which is kind of what the guys at Drift did.
Okay.
They wrote a book called Conversational Marketing, and that created a whole new, category. And we're like, let's do that for ScreenCloud. So we kind of signed up for a course, and it was like an online course, and sort of learned about how to structure a book. And as we were writing it, I was like, this is tough. This is not, it's an interesting idea, but I'm not sure what we're writing is going to be that interesting. And so we never actually finished it. But in my head, I was thinking, God, if I was doing this, but if I was doing it about that journey from agency to SaaS, I've got so much to say about that. Yeah. And so, I guess that was a kernel of it. And so I just started writing it. And in my head, I was thinking, if I'd like to write all the things that I wished I'd known when we started ScreenCloud, and avoid some of the crazy mistakes that we made, and, the assumptions that we'd made, and the things that I just wasn't aware of. I didn't know anything about raising capital. I didn't really know anything about SaaS metrics and the importance of that. I didn't really know how to validate an idea. I didn't understand how to structure a SaaS sales team, how to kind of make sure that you're tracking things in the way that kind of can allow you to improve results and things like that. So that was really the kernel of it.
It's good work. It was a good read, certainly. And one of the things I really enjoyed on LinkedIn is seeing people who are talking about the book.
Yeah.
Like random people I know have found their way to the book and they're talking about it online. It's kind of cool.
I've had a few instances where I met someone a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, who'd read the book, and I didn't know him. I'd not met him before. And he said, I've read your book, and then started quoting anecdotes from the book to me.
Really?
And then this morning I woke up and had a really nice LinkedIn message from someone saying, hey, I've read your book, and everything I can't remember what you said, every paragraph, I'm living exactly what you're talking about.
No, really?
And those sorts of things, that just makes
it's
it all worthwhile.
It's an agency hell, and he wants to find a way out.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a massive fondness for agency owners because I was one.
Yeah.
And I also kind of think, oh my God, the difference between, I don't want to slag off agencies, and I know you don't want to talk about agencies, but the difference in terms of financial value that you're creating as a consultancy, and it's a multiple of EBITDA, compare that to multiples of ARR when you're valuing a SaaS, and it's just like, you could make something so much more significant.
Yeah, totally different game. So if anyone does want, if you're listening in an agency and you do want to sell it, come speak to me, because I can buy your agency and you can go on and build a product with David.
It's kind of like
it's perfect.
Joined up. We should start a business.
We should do that.
Maybe a SaaS business.
Look, if people want to get in touch with you now, if they want to get your help or whatever, how do they do that?
Either go to my website, davidhart.io. It's got everything on there. I write a weekly newsletter as well. Sign up to that if you don't want to shell out for a book just yet, or buy the book. And then, if you want to, I work with people in different ways. I'm a non-exec director for about 7 or 8.
Okay.
But obviously I probably can't do that anymore. There's a limit to how much you can do of that. But I kind of, there's not really a one size fits all. So I'm kind of doing a bit of advisory work, like, coaching type work, as well as kind of running workshops. And it just really depends really how people want to work with me.
And now we're going to lunch. See ya. Big thanks to David for coming to the studio to see us. There are 5 copies of his book that I have on my desk waiting to give away. Nothing fancy today, no landing pages, no data capture, nothing like that. All you need to do is email me, unicorny@selbyanderson.com, and tell me why you think you should have a copy of the book. I'm going to choose the 5 best answers, and I will send one to you if you are one of the best. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you next week on the Unicorny Marketing Show.